Yesterday, we've been talking about the plot connected to Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. Today, we go deeper into the themes. What are the topics that are widespread and that the book deals with? First of all, love, marriage, corruption, hypocrisy, and chivalry. Chivalry is important because it's one of the values of the Middle Ages. And the brave knight had to respect these characteristics of chivalry, which means being generous, open-hearted, and open-minded at the same time, courageous in battle, but at the same time gentle and kind, with like a woman, with people that needed help. There is also an order in these stories because sometimes they have to give another point of view to the ideas that were dealt with in the tale that went before. So why is it interesting? Because your book explains it's a kind of an open dialogue between people coming from different walks of life. Why? Because the fact that there are so many people there helps sharing ideas coming from different social levels and at the same time to compare them. So that's why the idea of choosing people going on a pilgrimage is particularly smart, because in this way you can talk about people that in general don't have any contact with them, because don't forget that society in the Middle Ages was very narrow. There wasn't a communication between people belonging to different groups. And that was the only place where you could find people from the clergy with, and also from the different ranks of the clergy, with people from the middle classes or coming from the military. So they are not, they are types, not well-rounded characters. In what sense types? They represent a typical human being and especially a social class. So they don't have features that make them unique. When we deal with types in general, we deal with comedy or things that are not particularly profound or tragic in tone. Differently from tragedies in which there is also a development in characters due to the experiences he or she undergoes. Here there are types, which means also flat. There is no psychological depth or development or change. Example of the people that you will find: the virtuous knight, that represents the values of chivalry we have been talking before. The domineering wife. Wife in English doesn't necessarily, in Middle English, that is the language used for this work, doesn't necessarily mean moglie. Can also mean donna. The libertine friar, frate, libertino. Libertine means that he is sexually active, that he has no limits to what he wants to do, and he enjoys life and lives for entertainment. The elegant and vain prioress. So a prioress that even if belongs to the clergy is elegant and vain. Vain means vanitosa. She likes, pays attention to her outer appearance. But also the poor parson. So another person from the clergy that is a good person, that isn't narcissistically involved in himself. Or the middle-class man, a miller, that is cunning. Cunning means shrewd, that he knows how to solve problems and also how to do things that are useful for himself. So these characters at the same time are not completely flat. They are types, but Chaucer is good to make them not as profound as the tragic characters, but with some qualities that make them well described, not completely well-rounded, but well described. and is much ahead of the rest of plays that you can find, or epic works that you can find in the Middle Ages, that in general have characters. They are more static on the one hand, so not fully represented, but emblematic in the sense of symbolic. So here they are representative of type on the one hand, but on the other, they are also human individuals. In the general prologue, these pilgrims are described and they start from the physical appearance. Why? This is interesting also for us because we start understanding the kind of clothes that people had, their appearance, their tools or accessories, which of course are representing their social standing, their position in society. Everything is accompanied by humor and irony. And the external narrator also sometimes comments on the pilgrims. So even if he doesn't completely judge them, at the same time is ironical. And so it means that there is a subtle criticism, but not real moralistic judgment. It's more having fun of them. The only characters that are not mocked really are the good knight, the brave knight, and the parson. So even the way they speak represents they're coming from different levels of society. And this is interesting. They say they are often rude and frequently interrupt one another. Why? Because they show that they are not particularly genteel or polite. Then this is written in Middle English. Let's have a look at what Middle English is. You remember that we studied Old English, that is the language of the Anglo-Saxon populations that settled in England. Now, we know that the Normans started to be the new rulers. Of course, with them, also French became the language of the upper classes. At the beginning, there were two different languages that coexisted, French on the one hand and Anglo-Saxon on the other. But little by little, the two languages started mixing, and the mix of these two languages is what makes up the so-called Middle English. What else? At the beginning, Anglo-Saxon remained the language of the lower classes of the underworld. Why? Because they didn't have any possibility to become educated. Latin is the third language that existed at the time, but it continued to be the language used by the church on the one hand, and also the language that was learned by scholars, but people that had access to higher forms of education, and also the language of the law. Little by little, as I told you before, people started mixing and meeting one another, and at the same time also languages started to mix. So after a period of contamination and bilingualism, then there were borrows coming from French that started to replace the Anglo-Saxon words. People didn't completely like French because of the War of the Rose, of the 100 Years' War. It was considered the language of the enemy. So it wasn't completely accepted by certain parts of the population. There was also a change in grammar. One of the greatest change is the fact that there is the disappearance of grammatical gender of nouns. Why grammatical? Because it means there are no endings that represent the gender. In English nowadays, a word like sister can be used with an adjective, nice sister, my nice sister, but there is no connection, because nice can also be used, my nice brother, with a male word. Whose gender is male. Expansion of vocabulary, because a lot of words coming from French make this vocabulary of English wider and wider. And what is interesting is that there are words that coexist, that represent the same thing. For example, if I say cow, cow is the animal. If I say pig, pig is the animal. But in English, there are also words, and in this case, these new words come from French, that that have a different word for the cooked meat, for the meat that is eaten. So we don't say pig when you go to the restaurant, you say, I'd like some pork. You say beef, don't say cow, and so on. You say, what else? Lamb, you don't say sheep or something like that. Mutton, you don't say sheep, and so on, because mutton is what you eat. Why? Because in general, this comes from French, since it's the language of the upper classes that didn't have any contact with the real animals, but just with the meat that they ate. Okay, if you don't have any questions, this is what you can do for the next time.